It is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Kevin Rossen, who is the founder and CEO of Divergent Dental, which provides dental practices with a focused, simple system to track your performance. He comes from the front lines of dentistry, having worked alongside his father, who is David J. Rossen, as the office manager of his established dental office in North Texas. Kevin's focus in dentistry is to equip dentists and their teams with tools that are easy to use and keep the team focused on data that matters. So you're in, are you in Louisville, Texas? Is that where you're at?
That's where I live, yeah. It's just a little bit north of Dallas. My dad's practice is in a town called The Colony.
The Colony. So you're outside of Dallas. That means you're one of those obnoxious Dallas Cowboys fan. Are you a Cowboys fan?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not a Cowboys fan, and I say unfortunately because I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and we just had a rough evening yesterday in the playoffs.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, it's something that I was born outside Chicago, and I've tried to kick the habit, and I just really haven't been able to break it yet.
Well, you know what? I thought last night, okay, so if you're not a football fan, hang with me because it's still a great lesson. I still think the NFL is probably the most competitive business in the world. I mean, there's only 38 franchises. They do over 10, 12 billion a year in sales, but they got 100 million Americans looking at them under a microscope. So they're the most analyzed business on the world. So you can draw a lot of great analogies. But I love this. So last night, if you're not a football fan, the Bears should have won. They were on like the 20, 30-yard line. All they had to do is a chip shot field goal, and the field goal guy hit the uprights. And I loved this guy posted this on ESPN this morning. Bear with me. Whether you have football lesson time, whether you are a football fan or not, there's a good chance you have heard by now that the Bears-Eagles game from last night, in case you did not, the short version is the Bears kicker, Cody Parkey, had a chance to win the game on the final play, a field goal kick. When he first made the kick, the Eagles called a strategic timeout just before the play to serve as a distraction to the kicker, who has had some trouble all year with successfully making his kicks. In such a high-pressure situation, the last thing you want to do is overthink it. Well, the Eagles knew this, and that's why they called the timeout. On the second attempt, Cody hit the uprights and was unsuccessful on his attempt, therefore costing the Bears the game. Here's the point. All of us who step out in the name of accomplishing our goals and playing at the highest level subject ourselves to moments like this, and allow me to remind all of you when you do so, it is inevitable that you will have days where you hit the uprights and take a loss. What I am impressed by is this kid's perspective after this huge moment. He said, this is what he said to the reporters. He didn't even hide or duck out. He said, this is going to sting for a couple of days. I was prepared and did everything I could. The sun will come out tomorrow. These were the comments coming out of his mouth post-game as he didn't hide from the media, but instead faced them head on. Today, there are going to be a million memes and jokes flying around the internet. Hell, I've posted 3 today on Dental Town. I feel guilty already. They will all be coming from people who will never sniff having an NFL career. I want to remind you that when you decide to step up and go for it in anything you do, you will open yourself up to the world like Cody did last night. There will be days where you make your kick and win the game, and there will also be days where you miss your kick and you will feel like the world is ending. In these moments, remember that strength looks like. Remember that many times you stand alone in your defeats. In these moments, remember to think like Cody. For as tough a moment as this is for him, behind it is a purpose which requires faith to understand and patience to experience. I applaud Cody amidst the waves of criticism he will face. But anyway, it was just amazing how this kid, because I have the same problem with Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, because his dad is a dentist, and he's been on this show like 3 times. And Ed Zuckerberg, I mean, we both are bald dentists that have 4 kids. And when I see his kid getting just eaten alive in the media or grilled before Congress, I feel sorry for Ed, because if that was my kid, I'd probably be in the corner sick and crying and sucking my thumb and everything. And so when you're in the limelight, holy moly. But what I want to tell you is the reason I was so excited to get you on this show is you're dealing with dentists who don't even know where the uprights are. I mean, this kicker instantly knew he missed the field goal and they were going to lose the game. You go into a dentist's office. What is your overhead? I don't know. How many new patients you get? I don't know. I mean, you ask him any business question in the world. Am I wrong or right? Or, I mean, what percent of the 211,000 Americans who have an active license to practice dentistry
Mhm.
know their numbers?
It's not a huge number. I mean, I would say at most 20%. I would say
Okay.
that that's probably being generous. That know at any given time, within a reasonable guess, what their numbers really are or what they should be. It's kind of discouraging, honestly.
Yeah, they wonder why they're. I mean, it was Benjamin Franklin who said time is money. He was the first guy who coined that, and he said, if you don't work half the day, you just lost a half day's wages. I mean, time is money, and you go in there and you look at the scheduling, and someone will call up at 3 o'clock and say, "Well, I broke my tooth," and the receptionist thinking, "You know what? Well, why don't you just come down tomorrow?" She
Mhm.
doesn't even know what the break even point is for the day. She doesn't even know that they open at 8. It's 3 in the afternoon and they haven't even broken even yet. And maybe squeezing that crown in at the last appointment or the end of the day or getting them come down might have been the only profit they made for the day. I mean, they don't know their break even point. They don't know. So go over, first of all, let's start with you from scratch, your journey. So your dad was a
Yeah.
dentist, and
Yep.
you decided to run his office for what? Well, just tell us
Yeah.
about you and your journey.
So about 7 years ago, my dad had half of his front office, which was actually two-thirds of his front office, get pregnant and decide they wanted to stay home with their kids. Both happen to be family members of mine as well. And I was looking to transition into something else, and I decided, hey, if you want me to come work with you, I'd love to come, take a little bit of a detour in my career and just see what it's like working in the front office of dentistry. I never followed him in the clinical side of dentistry because when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I remember he would come home with the photo books of his patients and their jacked up teeth and their bloody, nasty mouths, and he'd put them on the coffee table in the living room. And I was turned off by that. I thought, no, thank you. I don't want to work with the people's mouths. So, but I decided, hey, in dentistry, working with their wallet, I kind of joke about sometimes, but I work with the front office, anything outside the mouth decided to help with. And really, my dad's always been really focused on numbers. He's had a number of different reports that we would look at every day and every week. And when I started, one of the tasks I had was I would have to run 3 or 4 different reports in our software. We were using PracticeWorks at the time, and then I'd have to update these other sheets, these spreadsheets, and I would spend 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there throughout the day, probably about 45 minutes there, just updating spreadsheets manually. And I thought, okay, this is kind of crazy, but I knew we needed the numbers, so I did it. So anyway, long story short, through all the process and converting over to Open Dental really accelerated our learning process and the accessibility of information. I figured out a way to track the numbers we really knew were most important to us, to see them every day, to get them delivered to us automatically so we didn't have to even remember to click the button. And we'd have everything we wanted to see every single day. And that's kind of how it got started. And then I had a kind of a voila moment thinking, there's probably other people that would want this too. And so I just kind of threw it out there between Dental Town and the Open Dental Users Forum, just said, hey, anybody interested in trying this out? And sure enough, a few hundred offices later, we've been growing slowly with very little marketing at all, just word of mouth and happy customers. So it's been a lot of fun getting to know numbers just from our perspective, but then also getting feedback from some of the best minds in the dental world, just to know what numbers matter most to dentists and deciding what numbers should we look at too.
So now Practice Works, that's owned by, they also own SoftDent, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hmm.
Did they used to be a division of Carestream?
Yeah, they use. So I'm not exactly sure the history. I know Kodak owned them at one point, and
Right.
Carestream I think owns them now, but I don't know. I haven't really been following their development over
It
the
went
past
from
7 years.
so when I got out 31 years ago, SoftDent was the big deal, and then it went from Kodak to Carestream, and then now it's called PracticeWorks or whatever. But you and I both switched to SoftDent, and this is not a commercial. I don't get anything free from anybody, but tell them to your journey. Why did you switch from PracticeWorks, which is the big major player, to SoftDent?
So it was actually Open Dental that we've converted to. So I
I
think
mean, to Open Dental, yeah.
yeah, I got you. So Open Dental, honestly, when we first started looking at it, it was because we were going to transition from paperless charts to from paper charts to digital charts. And when we tried PracticeWorks, it just wasn't going to work. We see about 40 patients on a fairly normal day, sometimes less, sometimes a few more. And we just saw some technical limitations with the software that just would not allow us to be efficient. So did some research. I heard a lot of people back in 2013, early in the year, talking about Open Dental back then. And honestly, I was underwhelmed by it when I first looked at it. I downloaded the trial, looked at it, I thought, okay, what is all the hubbub about this? This is kind of boring. It's nothing great about it. But then eventually I tried it out with the trial conversion and found that it was really easy to use, super fast, and you had full access to the entire database to do whatever you can dream up of numbers you want to pull out of the report, either on your own or with some third-party integrations as well. So really, after about a 6-month dragging my feet and talking with people, I decided, and with my dad, we decided this was the right move to do. And within about a week or two of making the conversion, we thought this was the greatest decision we've made probably since digital x-rays. It was a fantastic thing for us on every level, and we've been really happy with it. And I don't get anything from Open Dental either. I happen to manage a fairly popular user group of theirs, and I'm active on Dental Town in the Open Dental forum as well. But I mean, I just a big fan of the software, and one of the main reasons I'm a big fan of it is they don't handcuff your data. You own the data. If you want to move away from it, there's no problem. You're not locked down with them artificial. And I think that's one of the best reasons to use them, because you then can do what you want with the data itself, not just the software.
So you said you manage what group with Open Dental? You manage a user group?
Yeah, so it's in Facebook. I know there's a Facebook Open Dental users group that has a little over 5,000 people, and I'm one of the 2 administrators of the group. And we just it's just one of those places where people are already having conversations, and we keep it focused. We don't let people just kind of randomly plug their own stuff without at least disclosing what they're doing. And if it's related to Open Dental, we're fine with it. But it's a fairly active group. And it's been a lot of fun seeing people help each other out. I mean, it's kind of the spirit of the software too. It's not just we want to protect ourselves. We want to help each other know how to get the most out of the software.
So you just go to facebook.com/Open Dental.
So I think it's facebook.com/groups/Open Dental users. I want to say is what it is. I'm gonna look that up because I don't.
So it's groups.
Let's see, facebook.com/groups/Open Dental users. That's what it is.
Well, what you said was the story of Open Dental. It was actually started by a dentist named Jordan Sparks in Oregon, and he had dentrix, and he was trying to extract his patient's name and address out of there so he could make labels to mail a card because bleaching had just come out. So me and Jordan are about the same age, the big whitening thing. And he found out that not only could he not extract the data, but they had gone to great lengths to make sure he couldn't extract data. So he's like,
so crazy.
You're paying programmers to build extra walls. So he called him up and he said, what's that about? And they said, well, that's our data. And he's like, what? That's your data? That's my patients. So he started Open Dental. So it's just the fact that it's open. And when I go to call centers, if they take a call center and it's from a dental office that has Open Dental, they can, gosh darn, go in and schedule an appointment and say, yes, Kevin, and what's going on, schedule. They love it. And then when it's any other practice management software, they just say it's difficulty. So explain that in more technical terms. It's just, so Open Dental is just what its name is. It's just open. So is there any other open practice management softwares, or would you say all the other ones like Dentistry Uncensored are closed?
I wouldn't say all of them. I mean, there is a like a spin-off of Open Dental that some people have made called Practice Web. It's technically actually basically Open Dental's software that they've kind of put a little bit of their own polish on it, I would say. And I think there is maybe one other open one. But here's the deal for me, like the cloud is kind of where people are trying to move. And there's Dentrix Ascend, Curve Hero, and Fuse, I think, are 3 of the bigger ones out there. And a lot of people want to get rid of having the server and the IT oversight. And I get that. But what I really don't like about that is what you just described with Jordan is they control your data completely, especially in a cloud environment where if they go out of business, what happens to your data? It's not likely with things like Patterson or Shine that they're going to go out of business, but We said the same thing about some of the big companies 10 years ago, and look what happened to a lot of the major corporations they've gone under. So what I really think about with companies that say that they own the data, I think about with a covered entity, like specifically with HIPAA stuff, if the data got breached, who's it liable? Is the software company going to take responsibility for the data breach, or is it going to fall back to the doctor? We know the answer to that. Somewhere in the agreement, it's going to say that they're not liable for that kind of thing. So for me, I don't know. It's when you have, not only do you control the data, but when you don't have these artificial walls like you described, I just think that you can, with just a little bit of effort, or have a third-party integration that does the stuff for you, you can get the information that you need, because every practice is a little bit different. I know a practice in California where it's a semi-retired dentist named Bruce Stevenson, and his practice is just Invisalign now. So like he wants to know certain things with Open Dental. He just writes a query and just modifies it a little bit. That's very specific to an Invisalign only practice. And so that's just an example of stuff you can do with a completely, not only is it completely open, but they completely document everything for you as well. So you can, if you don't want to do it yourself, you can hire somebody through Upwork or Fiverr that will figure out how to get you the thing, or hire Open Dental themselves to write a query for you and get the specific information you want.
So then what's really the difference between Practice Web and Open Dental?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't used the front end of Practice Web, but what they say is they try to eliminate some of the bugs that Open Dental has. That I've heard that. I just haven't personally experienced any bugs with Open Dental. I don't want to like talk down about Practice Web. I just feel like it's they put their own wrapper over Open Dental, and it's a couple versions behind what Open Dental is. I think there might be some reporting that they have, but I personally haven't seen it from a front end experience, honestly.
So my journey, when I was 10 years old, my dad opened a Sonic drive-in in Wichita, Kansas, and he was my idol, hero, taught me everything. And back then there was a company, I don't know if you're old enough to have heard of it, National Cash Registers, NCR, that later got swallowed up by IBM. But I swear to God, my dad's cash register could run a dental office better than what we have now, and that was 56. That was 46 years ago. And I've always thought, I'll never be able to get over it. It's the fact that you're a dentist and you have all this patient information, address, insurance, billings, accounts receiving, but then the accounting software is not hooked up to it. It's like, my God, I don't care how good the practice management software is. If you like payroll, time is money. We talked about. You ask a dentist, okay, your hygienist worked from 8 to 5. How much did you pay her? How much did she collect? So my next question is, you say you use Open Dental software. What do you use for accounting software?
So I don't do the accounting for the dental practice. That's my dad that handles that. He uses I think he used to use Quicken, and he's been converting over to QuickBooks.
Okay, so Quicken and then QuickBooks. And do you think that Open Dental someday will program bridges to Quicken, or Microsoft bought Great Plains Accounting because I thought the smartest thing Bill Gates ever did. The reason I cannot stand Bill Clinton, Bill Gates was all that in a bag of chips. So Bill Clinton decided that was the time to go after him. You know what I mean? And he was trying to buy Quicken. And, here's Microsoft that's got Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And I knew if Gates swallowed up Quicken, that every farmer in Iowa would know their damn costs. They'd have their tractor, the accounting, the cost, and then eventually that could be, and so that never happened. They vetoed that. And then later Bill Gates went on to buy Great Plains Accounting, which they now call Microsoft GP, and the GP is for Great Plains. I use Peachtree. And I don't really think, I couldn't run my business off Quicken or QuickBook Pro. It's not sophisticated enough. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic. That's just sad. I spent 30 years in this crazy journey that Bill Gates was going to fix when I still had kids in grammar school, and Clinton's infinite wisdom was to deny that merger and acquisition. But anyway, but do you agree that the fact that all your accounting of payroll, rent, mortgage, equipment, insurance, all those things not into your costs. I mean, how do you figure the break-even point for this dental office so they know they go in there at 8 o'clock and they gotta do this much dentistry just to pay the bills?
Right.
How do you fix that?
Well, so one thing that you can do if you wanted to, you mentioned you wish it was integrated with the software. OpenDental does have an accounting module. It's kind of designed as QuickBooks likes. I think they use it internally. Like I think they run their accounting software like in OpenDental Software Incorporated or LLC. I think that's what they use. Don't quote me 100% on that. So theoretically, you could do it all in one place. I don't know anybody that actually uses their accounting module. So if somebody does use this, I'd love to hear from them. My email's kevin@divergentdental.com. I'd love to hear how you're using the accounting module. So you could hook it up. It is possible to hook that in there. I just think that it might be, you mentioned about being limited by Quicken or QuickBooks. I feel like you'd probably experience that with the accounting module because it's not designed to be a corporate level or enterprise level account module. But to answer your question, how do you know? I mean, you do need to know what your expenses are. And I think that, back to kind of what we talked about earlier, trying to get people distracted or overthink things. I think that sometimes there's two different extremes you'll see that I've seen with dentists or dental offices. They either don't look at anything or they look at too many things, Like there's some people that they're running reports every day, 6 times a day, and they're looking at their online dashboard that updates throughout the day, and that's what they're spending their time doing, as opposed to knowing the bottom line and knowing the trends. Because honestly, some days are going to be better than others, and some days it's going to be a huge win where you have a $20,000 net production day and $15,000 got collected. That's going to be great. Or maybe that's terrible for some of your listeners. I'm sure it is. But there's going to be some days you're going to have a negative production day because you had to write off some old debt or something like that. And so I tell people, don't get too hung up on the individual days too much. Yes, you should know your numbers every day. You should know the bottom line things, but pay attention to the trend more. So to answer your question on what do they need to know, you need to have that baseline. And honestly, I think you should know, what does it cost to run your office for an hour? What does it cost to have your hygienist run? How much does it cost to have a hygiene visit? So for example, what I did in my dad's practice, I want to know what are the actual hard costs for every adult recall visit. And so I kind of walked through, okay, what are the things we use? Disposables, the sleeve for the x-ray. And I found out that the actual hard costs, if we factor in everything that we could be doing, was less than $10. It was like $9 and something cents. And so with that, and then I added what the salary was for the hygienist, 30 minutes of their time in the office. And I found, okay, well, a break-even number is like $40 or something like that. Well, 30 something dollars, everything factored in. And so with that, now you know what you have to do in order to hit your number. So to answer your question, yes, it's not in one place. It's not as sophisticated as the NCR in some ways. So you do still have to combine a few different pieces together to know what the big picture is. And I know you've been talking about that for years, and I think you've had Nathan Sparks on your podcast, haven't you? And
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, honestly, it'll just take more people asking for it, because I honestly, not just do I think, I know not a lot of people are spending a lot of time. They're outsourcing it to their CPA. They're outsourcing it to a billing department. So they're not looking at the hard costs. They're not thinking about that type of thing. And if they were, I think there'd be more pressure on companies like Open Dental or Henry Schein for Dentrix to incorporate more of that.
And another one, but by the way, I know all my listeners are about 90% tell me they're commuting to work. The unlucky 10% are on a damn Stairmaster or a treadmill. So I just thank you to the 25,000 people who follow me on Twitter. I just forwarded on Twitter, Divergent Dental is at Divergent Dental. And I just forward that tweet. So when you get to work, you can find that tweet. It's got his website. By the way, where's the name Divergent Dental come from?
So it actually came from the Robert Frost poem, Two Roads Diverge in the Woods. I chose the path less traveled to make all the difference. And it was basically knowing kind of the story of that poem. And that poet was, when you look back in life, the choices you make end up taking you where you're at, and to not have any regrets in life is really what it comes down to.
Nice. Your next the tweet I retweeted was the return on investment on the call list and morning huddle reports are outstanding. Definitely makes my life easier, but also helps a lot of others in my office organize. And that's from Dr. Kyle Hickman. and Havens Family Dental. But another one, the next tweet says, stats say that case acceptance can be between 30 and 50%. Divergent users are averaging 68.8% case acceptance. You know, the thing about numbers is junk in, junk out. Some dentists say, yeah, but the guy that has a 50% case acceptance, all he diagnosed was cavities. But if I diagnose cavities and bleaching and bonding and veneers and Invisalign, then I might only have a 20%. You know, how do you track case acceptance? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you separate the pie in the sky election stuff? Like I'm 56. If you told me I needed bleaching, bonding, veneers, I'm like, dude, once you have a liver spot on your head, you don't qualify for any of those procedures. So how do you track case acceptance?
Yeah, so there's two different ways we look at it, and that's an excellent question because there's not a generally accepted definition of case acceptance in the dental industry, which I think is kind of crazy. So how we look at it in relation to the percentage of patients scheduling or completing at least one newly diagnosed procedure. And so what I mean by that is what you talked about. If the doc told you needed a filling, you need 4 veneers or 8 veneers, whatever, and then a periodontal maintenance, whatever. So just say, well, I just want to schedule that one filling, doc. We would count you as accepted for that day, for that treatment plan for that day, even though you only scheduled, say, $200 out of a $2,000 plan. So we would count you as accepted. And that's how I encourage practices to look at it, because you mentioned the garbage in, garbage out. Every practice has their own clinical philosophy of how they should treatment plan. And a lot of times there's going to be patients that can't even possibly schedule a third of what you present because it's stages. I mean, denture appointments, you can't schedule the extractions until you've got all the different steps ahead of time. Same thing with implants. You can't restore the implant crown until the implant's been placed. And so when we look at it, with that number specifically on that stat, the 68%, that number is based on the patient percentage, not the percentage of the fees. And what I found in relation to that, Howard, is that those who say that the case acceptance is going to go down when they treatment plan more, well, if you count the fees percentage, which we do look at as well in one of our reports, yes, that is true. However, I found the inverse of on the patient side. The more you treatment plan, the more acceptance that you're going to see as well. It's just kind of in some ways, it's a larger net in a way, but I also think it's a mindset for the dentist. I think when the doctor has the mindset of every exam, I'm going to look for what's in the best interest of this patient, and I'm going to treat them as if this was my mother or my sister or a family member, what would I recommend to them? And they're not going to hold back for that side. They're going to be honest with them and say, here's what you need to have done. I found that those who treatment plan more produce more. It's you kind of have to start with that.
How old is your company, Divergent Dental?
We're coming on 5 years now. We were founded in 2014. Basically 5 years ago is when I started the infancy. I just started it in the early part of 2014, just as kind of a beta testing and getting feedback. Went live the fall of 2014. So depending on when someone's listening to this, 5 years.
And how many dentists are you? Only dentistry?
Yes, only dentistry.
Is it only general dentistry?
We do have some specialists like pediatric and a few orthodontic offices, but it is definitely focused more on the general dentist.
And can I ask how many clients you got?
So we've worked with a few hundred. So
a few hundred?
Yeah.
And what lessons? I mean, do you have any case like the average dentist when they started with you? Here's what they were doing, but having that biofeedback. They're doing better. I mean, are they doing better? What kind do you have any data about that?
I haven't really done the strict analysis of before and after. I'm not the greatest marketer. So that's one of those things that if I had that exact number, I know it would be helpful. I do know Dr. Hickman and others, like one of the reports that we look at with the morning huddle, just a simple process of going through your day and having a systematic way of knowing who's due for x-rays, who's due for exams, and looking at that and then actually deciding if you're going to schedule those things. That'll find 1 to 3% every day, with very, very rare exception that they'll find times that you could add a bite wing, you could add a full mouth or panoramic, or you could add an exam to the schedule just to bolster the production for that day just from that. But as you know, as a dentist, when you do those things, you're going to find more dentistry to do as well. And you're going to diagnose things that need to be done. So the direct impact on the production on just the morning huddle report itself can be a 1 to 3% increase, sometimes even higher every single day.
And this is New Year's, and it's the new year, and you're the podcasting on the first day of the new year of podcasting. And what percent of the Fortune 500 companies already have a budget for 2019?
I'd say 100%.
100%. What percent of the dentists do you think have a budget for 2019?
Oh man, that's
Three?
a great question.
Yeah, three. And
Yeah.
so those three probably aren't watching right now. But so the bottom line is, and the other thing is, they say marriage fails for basically three things: money, sex, and substance abuse. And when it comes to money, you throw around these terms like, yeah, I get $1,000 for a crown. You come home from work, your spouse says, how was your day? Oh, good. I did 4 crowns. So the spouse thinking, wow, that's $4,000, because they don't know the difference between the fee and what you charge, and the adjusted production, and the write-off, and then all the overhead. I love it when CPAs are so family oriented. They say, no, I'm not going to do your wheat farm with the farmer on the tractor. You're going to bring your spouse in here. I need to talk to the couple. And I think for 2019, what you ought to do is get one of these dashboards, get committed to your numbers, and bring it inside the house. You're a family business. And you know what? I learned so much business from my mom and dad sitting at the dinner room table, and that was when they had calculators and those little rolls of paper. And yep. I can still remember, it seems like yes, my dad had his readers on, holding up this strip of paper, trying to look at this number, and mom sometimes saying, that's not a 2, that's a 7, and it just, I mean, you got to make it a family business, because this is serious stuff. What do you think is your most popular features of your dashboard? What number do you think people are talking about the most when they said, man, Kevin, I'm glad I signed up for this. I really like this feedback on these numbers?
So on our daily report, the thing that we hear the most about is the case acceptance number, because that's a really difficult thing to track manually. It's subject to error. And so when you automate that and you don't have to enter anything extra, and you understand how it's calculated, you get a really good feedback on that. And then also reappointment rate. So those two numbers, you'll be able to know those every single day, what it was for the day, what it was for the week, what it's been for the year. So the case acceptance and reappointment rate, those are two things for me that I love to have practices know, because with reappointment rate, if you're not tracking it at all, you're probably in the 60%. I mean, that's probably where you're at. That's usually if someone's actually, trying, they're going to hit 70. But unless it's a point of emphasis, you're not going to hit where you should be in the 80s. 80 to 85% is definitely the target that I'd recommend based on what I've seen practices doing. As far as patients, when they leave your practice, do they have their next appointment scheduled? And honestly, if they're not looking at this at all, I mean, that's probably just an indication of the rest of the practice of things that aren't being analyzed. And reappointment rate, and then actually just as a big picture thing, goals. And so one of the things we did early on, we decided that we wanted to have not just what have you produced month to date, because that doesn't really matter. I mean, honestly, it's January 7th today, and have you produced $10,000 so far month to date, or have you produced $20,000 or $100,000 month to date? Just knowing that number in isolation doesn't really matter. It's where you should be in order to hit your goal. And so with our dashboard, what we do is we have a default goal using a formula we've produced that if you don't know what you should be aiming for, we set a goal for you. And a lot of practices, that's what they end up using anyway, because they don't know what they should be looking for. And so it's a little bit of a stretch. It's a 5% growth over what they've averaged over the past year. Stay a little bit ahead of inflation and also encourage growth. But then also it shows you where you should be month to date, both with an indicator and also a color. And honestly, that thing is probably what we get the most positive feedback, because you can know from whatever device, you just pull up your iPhone, your Android, you just look at it, you can see the colors without even zooming in. You can know at that moment in time if you're on pace to hit your goals for the month. And so those are kind of three of the things I would say are that what people really enjoy about our service.
So the rule of 72 is you calculate, you take 72, so divided by your growth rate. So 72 divided by 5 means you would double your dental office in 14 years. 72 divided by, let's say you're going to grow it 8%. You double your practice in 9 years.
Hmm.
10% growth rate would obviously be 7 years. So you need to have these goals. What percent of your clients are using open dental?
Oh, it's a large percentage. At least two-thirds, probably a little bit more, probably three-quarters, because that's what we started with. I started it for me first, something I wanted and I need, and so it was only open dental for the first year and a half. And then we've added Dentrix and EagleSoft as well. So the majority of our customers are open dental, and almost every startup is starting with open dental as well. So
Yeah,
that's
and you know what? And this is how dumb I'll tell you how I'm the dumbest guy in the world. I own a media company. I own a magazine where people advertise on my magazine website, and then I recommend Open Dental, who doesn't advertise. And so, I mean, not only is this Dentistry Uncensored, I'm telling you the truth. I have people saying, why do you do that? Well, because I'm dumb. I mean, I want you to get the best information, and open dental is just open. I don't think there's really a substitute for it. It's open, and every time I'm talking to someone out there that's making software for online appointment or this or that, they always tell you, well, I love open dental because I can program to it.
mm,
And then you look at some of these DSOs, and they're starting to like get their accounting department, and they might be on Microsoft, Great Plains, GP, or Peachtree, or some of these big deals, and they're hiring. They're saying, "Man, I'm just going to hire a programmer for $40 an hour and start automating what we're doing." Because I mean, it's a dashboard for a reason. You look out the dashboard of your car, you got to know where you're going.
mm.
And these dentists, I love them to death. I get it. I mean, I'd rather pull. I mean, if you ask me what's the most fun thing I could get for Christmas, it'd be a set of four impacted wisdom teeth with someone ready to go. I mean, I get it. The dentistry's fun. I get that. I get it if you own a restaurant, you're a chef. I know you want to watch the cupcake wars. I know if you're a baker. I get all that. I don't have to be a leader to motivate you to do what you love. I got to be a leader to motivate you to, like you said, the path less traveled where,
Yeah.
dude, like I've been in Ahwatukee for 30 years. You know, there's only 3 restaurants that have lasted the whole time my dental office is, and
Wow.
all the other ones are burning and churning regularly. And
Hmm.
I would take my kids to those restaurants, and I would tell my kids this when they were like 8, 10, 12, 14. I said, what? I said, I'll ask him just a few business questions. And if he can't answer them, this restaurant won't be here in a year or two. We played that game for 15 years. My dad used to play it with me. And I remember Zach was he was so cute one day. This guy said, anyway, long story short, yeah, I think he could have only been like 7 or 8 or 9. He says, I bet that guy's not in business by Christmas. And,
Oh, wow.
yeah, they just don't know their numbers.
Yep.
So how much is your service?
So our monthly fee is 149, and we don't have any contracts or any setup fee because, well, first off, for the no contracts, that's how I prefer to have my like as a customer. That's what I look for first and foremost. But then more importantly, back to the idea of not locking people in artificially. You know, if we're not providing value, or if it's not a good fit for the practice, I don't want people to have to pay me for 10 extra months because they don't like what we have to give. So, you know, there are other services like us out there, and some of those are going to be better fit for others, but we try to provide something that's really easy to use. It keeps people focused. We're not the most complex tool out there, and that's by design. You know, we're trying to not have paralysis by analysis. We by design limit the amount of data that we're providing and when we provide it. It's designed to be a routine of life, and not have you focus on the numbers every single minute of every single day.
Yeah, I agree 1,000% about contracts. Why would you want to be locked into someone you don't want to be locked into? Especially, wouldn't you agree when it comes to marriage? Do not get the contract. Don't get married. Just live as friends. So is that what you chose?
No, I've been happily married for 16 years, so
Oh, you were gonna be my idol saying, no, I have no contract with my wife, no setup fees, we can get out anytime. But yeah, I'm telling you, in business, I mean, why
yeah,
do these companies why like your phone carrier? I mean, when you go get a phone, I mean, what is Verizon and Sprint? What do they all try to do?
yeah, get you in a
Lock
contract.
you into some contract. It's like, oh yeah, and go get a long-term contract with Comcast, then call me back in a year and tell me how that's going. Um, so you should I think you should really do a survey of what happens to your users
Yeah.
after the end of 1 year. I mean, this is 2019. You sit there and look, this is what happens when the team leader, and by the way, who are you working with mostly when you're doing this? Is it mostly with the dentist? Is it mostly with the dentist spouse? Is it the office manager? Who is usually the motivated contact person when you're working with a dental office?
The majority of it is coming from the dentists, and I would say
Nice.
probably about 2/3 to
Nice.
3/4. And we've done some stuff with Mark Costas, and he does some podcasting as well. And so people hear the podcast and they respect him, they respect you, and they get motivated. So what I find is best is when you have as many people as you feel comfortable with on track with your numbers. Like some people, some practice owners, they don't want to share their data with their team because they're worried about what they think about it. And I respect that. And everybody runs their practice how they want to run it. But the more people that know the numbers, the better. People realize it costs money to run a business, and if they don't, you should educate them. You help your employees think a little bit more like a business owner, and you'll be more successful.
Yeah, I love Mark Costas. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, where the poor people live. He's up there in Prescott with a mile high, beautiful. You know what I love about Mark Costas' office the most? And he promised me he'd help me do this in my office someday. I'm going to hold him today. He's been on the show. He's got like, I don't know what. How many offices does he have? A dozen?
It's close to that, yeah.
Yeah, and you walk into any office, any operatory, and open up the third drawer. It's got the same stuff in it
Yeah.
as every. I mean, the guy is a genius. He's a master of logistics. That was the way Southwest Airlines said. The Herb Kelleher. The only secret to lower price is lower cost.
Hmm.
You're not going to lower your costs unless you quit doing meals. And we're not doing the hub and spoke. We're flying direct. We're only using one type of plane. On and on and on. And these dentists, they don't realize, they'll add a new procedure. They'll say, well, I'm going to add like sleep apnea. Do you realize the cost of what you just said? You got to go learn sleep apnea. You got to buy all this stuff. And they come back and say, oh, now I'm going to learn Invisalign. Then I'm going to place implants. I believe that if you don't do a procedure once a week, you're never going to hit critical mass the faster, easier, higher quality, lower cost, and be profitable on it. Do you have any benchmarks numbers you could tell these people? The people listening to you are all alone. They're
Hmm.
driving to work and they really don't know things like, well, what does the average dentist overhead, or what does the average new dentist get new patients per month, or how many hygienists do you have any numbers so that solo practicing dentist, Dental Town's motto is no dentist should ever have to practice solo
Yeah.
again. Can you give any more macro numbers since you are dealing with a lot,
Yeah.
several hundred dental offices?
Well, one interesting insight that I found this past year, I really had somebody ask me a question. What is the value of a new patient? And when the question was from that, some people have some ridiculous lifetime value of a new patient. That's not what the question was. The question was, within 6 months of a patient being in your practice for the first time, how much have you collected from that patient? So that was I think that's a better question than the lifetime value, some mythical fairy number that really doesn't really matter that much. But 6 months will pay the bills in some way. So I looked at a new patient from the type of exam they had done. So I looked at a large number of our practices, and we looked at a comprehensive exam, limited exam, and the comprehensive periodontal exam. And we figured, okay, within 6 months, what's the average dollar figure collected based on those new patients? And the question then was, which one of those is the most valuable? And so what we found was $811 is really what the number is collected. But drilling down even more than that, you mentioned about the toothache or someone's ready to get the tooth fixed. A comprehensive exam, the average collection was only $706 versus a limited exam or emergency exam, $951. And so the motivation I'll tell you for the practice owners listening to this is help your team understand that there's nothing more motivating in dentistry than pain. And actually in life, people often will refuse to change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. People don't want to get a tooth crowned. I mean, they just don't want to have that done. But if it hurts, then it doesn't matter how much it costs. Like, fine, I want to get it fixed. I don't want this pain anymore. So if a patient calls, hey, my tooth hurts, get him in as soon as possible. I mean, that's a benchmark I'd tell you is like, hey, know that more than anything else, new patient emergency exams is something that you should prioritize, getting them in your schedule as best as possible. But then as far as another benchmark, one thing that you talked about systems with Mark Costas, with your dad, with whoever, a periodontal disease. When I first get our practice set up, we have a monthly report and we provide information about their periodontal department. And basically, we look at what percentage of their adult recall patients are being treated for periodontal disease. And what I found is, on average, in North America, a private dental practice is only treating right around 9% of their patients for periodontal disease in some form or fashion. And that number is nowhere close to what the Centers for Disease Control, not a dental company, but a health organization, a health government. They say that I think it's 40% of the adult population suffer from periodontal disease. So it's about a 4-to-1 difference in the average periodontal being treated versus the periodontal disease that is there. And so for me, a benchmark is, I don't think 40%. If you're only hitting 9% periodontal disease, coming and saying our goal is now 40%, that's a little bit of a stretch. We used to say, if we're hitting 10% now, let's aim for 20%. Let's aim to hit 20% of our adult patients. Let's look at our system. Do we have a protocol in place for how we diagnose periodontal disease? Because that is one of those big things that hygienists love doing that. They'd rather do scaling and root plating than adult prophy any day of the week. And then on top of that, the hourly production is significantly higher for the practice. So everybody wins. The patient gets the treatment they need, the practice produces higher, and the hygienists love what they're doing too. So I think everybody wins when you know your periodontal thing. So those are a couple of things. Prioritize the new patient emergency exam, and then figure out, do you have the systems in place to effectively diagnose?
Another thing these young dentists will do, the average home that sells a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. The average dental office that sells is a $750,000 practice. So this young millennial is an associate somewhere for 2 or 3, 4 years and graduated with $400,000 of student loans and now buys a $750,000 office or $1 million in debt. And they don't even know that they're not watching that hygienist in the appointment, right? So if that hygienist works 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and she only schedules half of her cleanings for a 6-month recall, I mean, she's basically half the office is walking out every single day. And then you look at old dogs like me who have seen thousands of offices get 25 new patients a month, every month for 40 years, and they still have one full-time hygienist. And you say, well, if a hygienist worked 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, that's 2,000 hours. So she sees 1,000 people twice a year. And if you take 1,000 people, where's my calculator here? Since 1,000 people divided by 25, I mean, it's just, they just have people coming in the front door, going out the back door for 40 years. And then when you drive from Phoenix to Las Vegas, there's the Hoover Dam where it shows you if you have water retention and don't lose any of those water molecules, you can't even see across the lake. And they don't understand that. And they'll always tell you that they always want new patients. They're always like, oh, what do you do for new patients? And it's like some drug. And it's like, well, you live in a town of Edna, Texas, of 5,000 people for 40 years. I mean, doesn't the whole town know you exist? Don't they all know there? Why do you still need all these new patients for all these years? Because you're not tracking the reappointment rate. So talk about patient retention. And for a little investment of $149 a month. I mean, what is $149? An MO composite on number 3. I mean, so for one MO filling on number 3 on a PPO fee schedule, talk to them what your technology can do to build a Hoover Dam and to monitor how much water is leaking out and going down the Colorado River.
Sure. So we have probably 3 different things that we provide that do help prevent against attrition. First and foremost, we do track attrition for you. Let me define how we count it. We count attrition as a patient who has not been seen for an appointment in over 18 months. So we just finished 2018. That means in December, patients that had not been seen since June of 2017 have now been counted as attrition. I don't really care what the patient status is in the software. People move, they come back, they get mad, then they decide that you're not as bad as they thought you were. So I don't care what the patient status is. I care about, did they have their butt in your chair? That's what I count for attrition. So we provide a monthly list for you of patients who have just fallen into attrition, and you can then act on it. And what I'll tell you is, your automated systems, your regular phone calls, whatever you've been doing so far, it's not working to get those patients back. So you need to have this list and have a different plan in place, a specialized calling campaign where you're not just calling and leaving a voicemail. Those are things that you need to do with this attrition list. So that's a monthly thing that we provide. And then a weekly reports, we have two different reports. So we have a recall list to try to prevent them from getting into attrition. So it's designed to complement, again, if you're already using an automated system with emails or text messages, it's designed to complement that with a phone call. Because still there are patients that aren't going to schedule unless you call them. And then on top of that, sometimes you just have to annoy them just enough so they'll actually remember that they have a dental visit. A lot of people, they leave and they don't even think about the dentist until they're 2/3 or until you called them 17 different times. And then like, oh yeah, I think I'm due for a dental appointment 2 years later. So our recall list generates a fresh list of patients. It's very strategic in a schedule we've developed in order to keep them from going into attrition and to fill your hygiene department. So that's the other thing. And then we do have a weekly unscheduled treatment report as well. That's to help people schedule their diagnosed treatment that you've done with them. So I'd say that's 3 different services that we provide, all part of our regular monthly service right there.
And people are just incredibly complex. I mean, the one thing that seems to amaze me more and more as I get older and older and older is just how complex this wild animal Homo sapien is. I mean, asking someone to schedule an appointment for 6 months doesn't seem like anything to you and me on a smartphone. We open up our Outlook calendar and do it. But I mean, what percent of Americans just can't even fathom scheduling an appointment 3 months from now? I mean, they're very, very complicated creatures, and there's no one size fits all. When you talked about automated systems, are there any that you recommend or works well with your Divergent Dental?
The one that we've used in my dad's practice for the past few years is Practice Mojo. But honestly, we're about to switch over to the Open Dental e-services. So it's designed to be implemented with the e-service. And the reason I am going to switch to that is because they have an online web scheduler as part of the integration now. So that you mentioned about the phone, now instead of sending an email, hey, call us to schedule the appointment, they check their email at 11 o'clock at night. Well, now they say, hey, you're due for your cleaning. Click here to schedule your appointment. Now it can do that. So my recommendation actually, well, twofold. Number one, find one that's not overly expensive. And if you're paying $300 a month for your reminder service, you're probably overpaying because there's other options out there for half that cost. But then also find one that has integration with new technologies so that patients can schedule with their technology. I mean, I use I know urgent care centers or even scheduling your car for maintenance or ordering food. We're all using our smartphones for that type of thing. So I think that instead of being afraid of the technology and saying, hey, what if this patient screws up my schedule for that day? Realize that your patients are already going to screw up the schedule for the day when they don't show up. So it's going to happen already, no matter how you schedule. But I think that by having that technology, honestly, the thing I'm most excited about is that patients will appreciate having that option more, and it'll build rapport with them. So personally, if you're Open Dental, I would encourage you to check out their e-services bundle. If you schedule 1 or 2 appointments a month, it's going to pay for the cost of the e-services.
And who owns Practice Mojo?
It used to be owned by Smart Practice there in Arizona, but I think they got sold over to, I think Web.com owns them now. My dad actually was good friends with the founder of Smart Practice, which is one of the reasons we went with Practice Mojo in the first place. Nothing against Practice Mojo. If anybody's listening, we're not upset or anything. It's just that we think we're ready for the integrated thing with Open Dental and their e-services.
And who was the founder of Smart Practice?
It's Jim Rode.
Jim and Naomi Rode. Yeah. I love that guy so much, man. And what I could not believe about Jim Rode is when I was here was 87 and he was all that in a bag of chips, had this big Smart Practice. I think it was called Samantha Donics back then. They had like 1,000 employees, and I would drive down there. I think it was on like 2600 South McClintock, and I would walk in there. And they go, "May I help you?" "Yeah, I want to talk to Jim Rody," and they'd take me right to his office. And then I'd sit down with him, and he'd give this stupid young 24-year-old dentist an hour of his time.
Wow.
The thing, he was just an amazing man. And his
Yeah.
wife, Naomi Rody, who became the president of the National Speakers
Yep.
Association, which is so silly because in Tempe there's this big building that says NSA, and half the people around there, what do most Americans think of when they hear the
Yeah.
NSA?
National Security
Yeah,
Administration.
they don't
Yeah.
realize it's actually the National Speakers Association.
That's funny.
I'm pretty sure the NSA is not in Tempe, Arizona. Um, but anyway, yeah. So these numbers, these dashboards are just everything. Online scheduling. We That was one of the reasons we also switched Open Dental. The online scheduling. Well, first of all, when we switched from Soft Dent to Open Dental, the people that kept telling me, "Howard, you've been talking about this time I do it," was actually my programmer, my Dentaltown programmer who started Dentaltown 20 years ago. Is still there, Ken Scott, because it was crashing all the time. Soft Dent was always crashing. He says, "I don't have
Yep.
time for this." And since we put in Open Dental, like I say, it's faster, it's never crashed, blah, yada yada yada. What do you think of their online scheduling? We use that now. And by the way, when we put up the online scheduling, it only took 1 day for
Yeah.
the first person to schedule online. What do
Yeah.
you think of that?
I love it. So I've done the analysis. Some people think that someone schedules an appointment online, they're less likely to show up. That's not what I've found.
Right.
What I found is they're probably more likely to show up, honestly, because the people who are looking to schedule online are already motivated. We still have some no shows, but again, we do have no shows with every type of appointment.
But
So I
don't
mean,
you? But I've already seen this rodeo twice. I remember when the ATM machine came out, and I first saw it with my dad. We were laughing. We walked into National Bank of Wichita on West Street and Central in Wichita, and we saw this guy, and we're like, "Well, why don't you just go inside and talk to the lady? I mean, you even get a sucker." And he was sitting there on this thing, doing this thing. So we walk in. We make the deposit. I get my little red sucker. We're walking out. We stop by and talk to him again on the way out. He's still dinking with this thing. And my dad and I said, "Yeah, that's never going to work out." And then now it just took over. I
yeah.
think people who can schedule an appointment online are just a cut above the rest. I mean, go back to your last Thanksgiving dinner. What percent of your cousin Eddie's and Uncle Larry's couldn't even do an online scheduling deal? These are more technologically oriented people. They have jobs that have computers, probably more likely to have dental benefits. It's an
Yeah.
entirely different breed of. I mean, seriously, what percent of America could not make an online appointment?
Very few. Maybe 5% couldn't do it.
Could or couldn't?
Couldn't. I'd say 90, 95% could from your phone. I mean, I don't know what the number is, but I think it's 80+% of Americans have a smartphone. And so if you have a smartphone, you could schedule your appointment from your phone anywhere, anytime. And it just makes sense to leverage that technology, and offer that as an option. It helps you. I think it builds your rapport with your patient base because it shows that you're keeping up with technology. It's not just a form that you fill out to say, "Hey, I'd love to request an appointment." You're actually scheduling the appointment online. I think that speaks volumes for the practice and just keeping up with technology, that you're not falling behind, and not just this old dying dental practice.
So let's do some terms because a quarter of. By the way, please leave. Thanks for the almost 9,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. Please put your questions in the comments afterwards, or email me Howard at dentaltown.com. But about a quarter of these kids will email me and say I'm a second year, third year, fourth year dental student, and then the rest are all under 30. And I get like one old guy a month that sends me an email at Howard at dentaltown.com and says, "Dude, I'm as old as you." But let's do terminology. On your monthly KPI report, KPI means key performance indicator report, you start with the gross and then you talk about write-offs, adjustments, net production. They don't even know what that means. So what is the difference between a gross and a write-off and an adjusted production and for a net production? Will you go over that terminology for them?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question because I have had some of my customers use the term true production, and I've had two different people use that term completely opposite. So some people say true production, they're talking about the gross production, and some people say true production, they're talking about the adjusted production. So gross production, that's whatever your regular fees are. So let's just say you have a crown that's $1,000. That's your gross fee for that. And that's the only thing you did that day. Your gross production for the day would be 1,000. But if you're in network with MetLife or whatever other insurance out there, the PPO fee might be $800. So at that point, you would have a write-off of $200, and then your adjusted or net production is going to be $800. And so with adjusted production or net production, what we're encouraging practices to do is focus on that, because I like to think of
So are you using adjusted production and net production as the same cinnamon? That's a
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
okay.
I
So
mean,
adjusted production is net production.
correct. That's right. Yep. So adjusted production and net production, those are as soon as each practice management software kind of uses a different term for that. So that's why we use that. I know Open Dental calls it net production, and I think the others might call it adjusted production. But personally,
that sorry to interrupt, but this leads to one of the things I got to tell these kids. You said earlier about how there's really no agreed upon terminology, and you're sitting there at the you're in Texas. You're sitting there at some Texas good old boys study club, and dentists start talking about their overhead, and so Billy Bob says, "Yeah, my overhead's only 50%." Okay, he doesn't even know that he owned his land and building, paid it off, and so he doesn't charge himself rent every day. So yeah, that's very different than someone who's a true accountant that says, well, you own this land and building and it's worth, $750,000. And according to the IRS, the standard and customary rent for this would be, 5% of production would be rent. So, and then the dentists that do talk about the numbers, every practice management consultant on earth will tell you that during the phone interview, they'll say, oh, Kevin, what's your overhead? It's about 60%. What's your labor? Oh, it's about 20%. Then you get there and labor's 29% and overhead is 86%. You're like, well, you just told me all these numbers. And then, so there's no agreed upon terminology. I've been trying to work with Tim Lott, where we can just, can we just agree on how to set up an accounting, just
great.
the coding.
Yeah.
So, there's no, I guess I'm saying there's no standards. And imagine if there were no standard. I know people hate dentists, or, they hate the government, they do. I mean, the majority of my homies don't like the government, don't like big government. But imagine if they didn't set standards on electricity. And every electrical plug was different. Imagine if they let the railroads. That was the problem that people were having. These railroads would go bankrupt, and then the other railroad down the street couldn't use it because they had different widths. So as the government stepped in and said, we're going to use the Roman Empire's chariot wheel, and the exact axis of the chariot wheel for the Roman Empire was with these railroads, because then when you go bankrupt, someone else can run their train down your tracks. So, and we don't have any of those standards in any of accounting. So the only reason I'm going on a rant on this is because a lot of dentists, dental town, so you don't have practice. So again, a lot of times you're sitting there and you're reading posts on Facebook, or you're hearing other dentists talking about their numbers. And I assure you, whatever number that dentist says is completely asinine. I mean, the chance that that dentist is using the right terminology, really knows his numbers, and is telling you something that a CPA could sign off with, I mean, it's a better chance that you'll be killed by a meteorite tonight on your way home. I mean, so I mean, on these terms, like you just said, true production. I mean, you're dealing with the same dentists in the same country who speak the same language, and they have exactly opposite meaning of this term. And that's what you get when you don't have standards.
I think a better phrase when I've started using recently is collectible production, because that's the number that you're going to want to try to collect on. You're going to get paid on. So adjusted net, whatever, but like collectible, that's the number that $800 is collectible production after the write-off or any courtesy adjustments. So, and actually just on that non-standards, Howard, I think it's amusing. There's new patient reports in different softwares, and all of them have this where there's different types of new patient reports. I've seen it in Dentrix, Eaglesoft, and I've seen it in Open Dental. You run a new patient report for the same month inside of the same software. It has different lists of patients, depending on how they're counting it within the own software. And so it's one of those things that, the lack of standards is crazy. And that's why one of the reasons when I talk about our stuff, I try to define what it is we're counting. And that's where, when I look at most of our numbers, I very rarely show gross production because I think that that's just a kind of a mythical number. Sure, you can charge $8,000 for your crown, but unless you're a high-end cosmetic dentist in Manhattan or maybe in Aspen, Colorado, you're not going to be having that as your actual collectible production for those crowns because you might be in network with certain insurances, and your actual collectible production is actually closer to $1,000.
And there's I can't believe, man, we've gone. I told you our show's an hour, and I'm so grateful you came on the show. We're already 10 minutes over an hour. We need to wrap this up, but
All right.
it's just amazing how the DSOs. I've podcast interviewed all the major DSO players, and it's no secret that private practice dentists and DSOs have a hard time keeping their associate dentists because most people don't go to school 8 years to be Kevin Ross's boy. They didn't say, oh yeah, when I was in high school, one day I wanted to grow up to be Kevin's boy. I mean, they wanted to be, your dad
Right.
wanted to be a doctor and own his own building and own his own practice. And when people sit there and say, oh, well, these big DSOs, they have really high turnover of their associate dentists. Dude, so does the private practice. Nobody's keeping associates. And so the bottom line is they want to own their own practice, and they always think they're going to solve the universe by traveling around and learning the greatest quality dentistry. If I just learn occlusion and implants and sleep apnea, and if I just learn all these things, you build it, they will come. And I'll tell you what, the DSOs are showing you that with the average associate dentist only lasting a year or two by having great understanding of their numbers, great understanding of their math, great marketing, great, just all the great management, that even though the dentist is turning over every year or two, they're making bank. And some of these locations like Aspen and Heartland and Pacific, they're all somewhere between 700 and 1,000 locations because they got this right. They got what you're doing right. And so then you go into the dental office and you say, well, this dentist's practice there, they didn't have any dental turnover for 40 years. This guy worked from 25 to 65. So what you need to do is ask yourself, what you don't like about the big DSOs, but what are they doing right? And what if you took what they're doing right and you brought it home? And then if 1/3 of marriages are going to be divorced over finance, maybe you should get your spouse involved. I always love it when a dentist will sit there and say, I can't believe the president of the United States doesn't cut Social Security or cut Medicaid. I'm like, dude, you can't even get your wife. You can't even get Muffy to quit blowing $10,000 a month. Oh, but the president, he can easily do it for 320 million people, but you can't even bring it home to your own spouse. And one of the reasons your spouse is spending so much money is because not only do you not know your math and adjusted production and net production and all these things, your spouse doesn't, and she thinks you're rich. You don't even know what you are. And we started this podcast with the Bears kicker hit the upright. And I'm telling you that at least that guy instantly knew he hit the upright and lost the game. And I am afraid that 80% of dentists don't even know where the uprights are. Thank you so much for your 500 posts on Dental Town. Thank you so much for bringing the discipline of knowing your numbers to starting off with your dad and now to several hundred dentists around the United States. It was a real honor and privilege to podcast you today.
Hey, thanks for your time, Howard. I really appreciate it.